Before starting, let me give a quick introduction about myself. My name is Kamal Sharma. I am in the final year. I am pursuing my IT degree in our college itself. I have completed Red Hat Certified System Administration course, wherein I learned how to manage a Linux operating system using the Red Hat Linux. I am also doing the next level of Red Hat certification, which is Red Hat Certified Engineer, wherein I will be automating the task. Like in the level one, you will be learning how to manage one system. In the level two, you will be learning how to manage multiple systems, because in an office, if you go, you will be having a lot of systems. So to manage that, I am learning the second level of Red Hat certification. Before getting into the session, can you just put in the chat box like how many of you are using what operating system in your system? Okay, let me just quickly increase my volume. But the downside is there might be some background noise, so let me know if it is a little bit too much. You could like every one of you can tell me like what operating system you are using in a day-to-day life. It can be Mac, it can be Windows, it can be Linux itself. If it's Linux, you can tell like which distribution you are using. Okay, thank you for the responses, Rajiv, Abhiram, and Sahil. Nice. I could see like most of you are using Windows, but some of you have started using Linux as well. That's good to see. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to just put it in the chat box. I will check it time to time. Okay. I'll in this today's session, I'll be telling you why you need to use Linux, and how can you get started with testing out the Linux commands, and some of the popular distributions that I have used. I have used a new term called distributions. I'll be explaining what it is in this meeting itself. Don't worry about that. Then I'll be showing you like how the Linux file system is looking like. Because in Windows, we have something called C drive, D drive, program files, and stuff like that, right? In Linux also, we have a somewhat different approach for that, like how the files are getting stored. I'll show you that as well. I'll also show you some of the basic commands that everybody uses on a day-to-day basis whenever you are using Linux. And one additional concept, which is something called aliasing, which is similar to type def in C++, wherein you give a new name for the already existing data type, right? It is somewhat similar to that. Okay, I'm just checking the chat section. I have two messages. Ubuntu. Okay, awesome. So well. Okay, well, Linux is an kernel developed by Linus Torvald, who is also the inventor of Git. He invented Linux because he wanted to give an operating system to the world which is free. Because at that time, Mac and Windows were giving the operating systems at some particular rate, right? He wanted to provide an operating system for all. At that time, we already had Unix, but Unix, but he wanted to do something different, so he invented the Linux kernel, and he made it open sourced. What do I mean by open source is I can see the code of that particular kernel uh, in some website itself. Like if I go to the kernel.org, I can see the code, whatever is being contributed. I can download any kernel that I want, and this is the latest kernel, and I can work on it, and I can contribute to that as well if I know how to do that. How actually a system works, all the system calls, you'll be learning in operating system, right? All the stuff, if you understand, you can actually contribute to the Linux kernel. Plus, if you have a good understanding of C and C++, you can create your own kernel, and you can create your own operating system as well. It's that easy if you know how to build a kernel. So yes, Linux is open sourced, which means the source code is available, and I can look at it anytime. So yeah, let me just like Windows, it's just an operating system that I covered. Yeah, why I switched over to Linux completely. One reason was, like I said, source code is available, so I will be knowing whatever is happening in my system or whatever the developers had done, right? I can see it. But in Windows, that's not the case. Like in Windows, they have restricted the code access to those people who are working in their particular the Microsoft company. Only they have the access to the Windows code. Nobody else. But in Linux, it's not like that. Let's say I want to see the code of Manjaro OS. I can easily go over to internet and type like Manjaro source code and I can easily get it. So it's that easy. But in Windows, you can't do that. You can't type like Windows source code and get it because it is closed source. Only they have the access. We don't have. Another thing is the security software updates. This you might have been facing, like most of the Windows users might know this. In Windows, the thing is it will just give you an update and it will ask you to do it. It won't ask you any permission also. It will just directly update it. But in Linux, it's not like that. Linux, if you want an update, you would be manually doing it. There are many ways to update in system. You can use the graphical user interface. That is using some any application in Linux. Like let's say we have so many apps, right? This like currently I'm using Linux only. We have so many apps, right? For that software management, we do have a app for that. I can also go over here and update it. Currently there are no updates. So even if I check for updates, it will say like there are no updates. This is one way to do it. Another way to do is using the terminal. The terminal is nothing but the equivalent of command prompt in Linux. In Windows, you'll be having command prompt, right? In Linux, we have something called as a terminal, which looks something like this. To show you the difference, I have made the background as white because if everything is dark, it will be difficult to identify, right? So for that reason only, I have given the terminal color as white. So I can also check it using update the system using the terminal as well. I'll quickly closing that. Okay, another thing. I think I have covered the software updates. In Linux, you can update only when you want to do it, not when the system asks you to do it. So that's a choice. You are in control of your own system. But in Windows, it's not like that. In background, it will be conducting so many processes and you won't be knowing what is happening then. But in Linux, it's not like that. If I want to see the processes going on, all I have to do is I can just type monitor and see like how much resources are being used, like RAM, like how much internet is being used, everything I can see. And it will list out all the processes that are running. And I can also sort it according to the CPU. You might say we have the task manager in Windows, but you won't be knowing like what each particular task does, right? Like we have n number of tasks in the task manager, but in Linux it's not like that. You will be knowing once you start using, you'll be knowing like what task is doing what process. Next point is lightweight and privacy. A Windows operating systems will need a very high-end configuration, like at least a minimum of 2 GB RAM and 512 GB or 256 GB or maybe 100 GB you need to install a Windows operating system. You might say like it will also work in 30 GB hard disk space, but the thing is, the operating system itself will take around 20 GB. Like once it is installed, it will have some default files, right? That itself will take 20 GB of space. Remaining 10 GB only will be using for the normal use if you have a 30 GB hard disk. So the Windows operating system is very heavy, and even if you start the system, it will take some time to start. But in Linux, it's not like that. Let's say you have a 256 MB RAM, or even less than that. There are Linux distributions which can support that particular RAM actually, and it will work very good also. Okay, I have been using this term called distributions quite a lot of time. Now let me tell what exactly is a distribution. Uh, Before answering that question, I'll give a very short example. Uh, you might be familiar with the Android operating system, right? Like we have Lollipop, we have KitKat, we have Nougat. All these are different names for different versions of Android. In a similar way, for different distributions, for like in different way, like everybody will have you have Linux kernel, right? The source code which you have seen. Anybody can modify the source code. The thing is, some specific companies have modified the source code according to their need. Those like the major companies are the Ubuntu, the Fedora, the Red Hat, and Ubuntu, Fedora, and we have the Arch also, Arch Linux. So these three major companies have modified the Linux kernel to their need. So whatever the other distributions which you see are just a clone of it or an upgraded version of the basic thing. So that's the thing. In Arch Linux, Arch-based system, we have Manjaro, we have Garuda. Uh, like those are the examples for Arch-based Linux. For Ubuntu, I mean, Ubuntu itself is a main fork of Debian. Debian is the main thing. Below that, like let's say in a family tree, we have the head, right? And we have the children. So in that case, if you see, Debian is the parent, and Ubuntu is one of the children, and that children itself has multiple children. Like Ubuntu-based systems, we have Pop OS, we have Manjaro, we have Qt OS. Like we have so many distributions based on Ubuntu. Another good example of Debian is Kali. So we can say like Ubuntu and Kali are children of Debian. Okay, so because they're both based on Debian only. So whatever commands you run in Kali will also run in Ubuntu because they belong to the same parent, which is Debian. In a similar way, let's say Arch is the parent. So as a child, we have Manjaro and Garuda. Just for an example. And so whatever commands you run in Arch, you can run in Garuda as well as Manjaro. So yeah, and once you install a system, it will just take at the max 5 GB or maybe less than that also, depending on the distribution that you choose. I'll give you some quick examples of Manjaro official site. I can take you. This is a Manjaro site, and we have Kali. These are the distributions, some of the distributions. And if I can also quickly show the list of distributions that I have explored over the past 1.5 years. So these are the operating systems, Linux operating systems that I have explored over the past 1.5 years. And whatever I have done in that, right, I have taken a note of it, and I have made a log. That's it. I have logged everything that I have done. Currently, I'm using Solus, like this particular operating system, whatever I'm presenting, right? This is actually a Solus operating system. I can verify that using the terminal itself. Like if I type neofetch, you can see that it is a Solus operating system, and it also shows my host configuration. That is, I have an Asus Tough Gaming laptop, and it will also show the Linux kernel version. We saw, right? We saw kernel.org. There we saw the kernel. It is based every Linux operating system will be based on like one particular kernel version. Mine is 5.14.7, and the latest is 5.14.9. So it's almost this is somewhat a stable version, and this is somewhat unstable. There are still some more features to be added, and it's still in development. Like everybody will be contributing to the kernel. Whoever is good with that, they'll be doing it. Because initially only Linus Torvald, right? This is the guy who started with the kernel thing. This guy only. He started with the Linux kernel, and he wanted to keep track of who is contributing to his project. So that's the reason why he invented Git. He is also the creator of Git. He is the one who found Git also. Like he coded that particular tool. What we do in Git is we keep track of all the changes that we do in a project. For example, let's say you have been given a PT1 project, right? In the initial version, you would be just having a design part. The next version, what you will do, you will just copy paste the folder and add some extra features and store it, right? So you'll be having two different folders to keep track of what all you have done. But if you have Git, you can't, you know, there is no actually no need to do have separate folders. Using one folder itself, we can keep track of all the things that you have done. To give a quick example for that, I will just show my Linux, this repository itself. Repository is nothing but an online folder. In Google Drive, you have a folder where you store the files, right? In a similar way, in GitHub, you create a repository to store all the code related to one particular project. So, and to keep track of what all you have done, you can just check the commit history. So in this way, I can list out like what all I have done. And this is one of the reason why you have to give proper commit messages. Commit messages in the sense to save in the games, if you play, you'll be saving a checkpoint, right? It is somewhat similar to that. You'll be keeping a checkpoint on what I have done, and you're just keeping track of it, like in a bullet point order. All these things, the Git will take care of it. And GitHub is nothing but an online hosting site where you can, post all the Git related stuff. And in chat, I have two things. Let me just see what it is. Yeah, Git is a version control system. Yes. Unix is the thing which was there before, like GNU is not Unix. That's the full form of GNU Linux actually. It's a recursive terminology. Unix is still like some of the features are not that open source. Some of them are closed. It is partly open source, partly closed source. So that's the reason. Uh, like if you see, if I take an example of Mac OS, it is a Unix-based system. It is not Linux. In Linux, we have some specific tools. Okay, like we have tools called Bison, Make, Meson. If you have all these tools, you can consider it as a Linux. If you don't have those tools, then it is Unix. So that's one of the key way to identify the difference between a Unix and a Linux-based system. So before, yeah, performance. Like actually, it's very fast when compared to a typical Windows operating system. If you are not that into gaming, then you can experiment with Linux, I would say. But since you're in third year, you'll be having some labs, right? For those labs, you'll be needing safe exam browser, which is the reason I would not suggest you to completely switch over to Linux. Even when I completely switched over, what I did was I had a backup of Windows, like in a separate disk. In my laptop, I have two SSDs. One SSD is for Windows separately. If I want to use Windows, I can just go to the BIOS and change the order. By default, I use Linux only, like for my day-to-day purposes. For example, you can see the Android Studio. For this, no, we have Android Studio subject in our thing. So I have Android Studio for mail. I have Thunderbird. I also have Zoom. I have VirtualBox through which I can create virtual machines, and I have NVIDIA settings. I have VS Code for coding purposes. I even have Sublime Text. So most of these apps, they are available for most of the platforms. For example, Sublime, VS Code, Android Studio. They are available for almost all the platforms, but it's not the case for every app, right? For example, Safe Example Browser. We don't have that for Linux. So that's the reason you need to have a backup for Windows as well. So far, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I will be answering it. Like dual boot, but it's not exactly dual boot also because these are two separate disks, not a single disk wherein you partition and do it. It is two separate disks separately, like it's totally separate. One thing has Windows, another thing has Linux. So yeah, how to get started with Linux? Well, one if your system configuration is somewhat good, right? Like if you have a minimum of 4 GB, then your system might support virtualization. Uh, to explain virtualization, what I could say is, just a moment, I have to take this. Okay, I'm back. Yes, but in some of the cases, it is detecting that you are using virtual box and it won't allow you to proceed. So, to be on the safer side, it's better to use the actual operating system. To answer your question, Sahil, that's the thing. Okay, how to get started? One thing is you can use tools like VirtualBox that is available for Windows as well. You can see this, right? Oracle VM VirtualBox. Well, in this you can create several virtual machines and you can use it. In that way, you can test it out. Like in VirtualBox, I have Manjaro, which is another operating system, and for the rest of them, I have different servers for various purposes. Like I said, right, in second level of Red Hat Linux, you'll be controlling different systems using one system, right? So for that only, to instead of having multiple actual physical devices, which is very expensive, we go for virtualization, wherein you can emulate or imitate an actual operating system using virtualization tools. So I have that's one way to do it. Another way is if you have VMware, right? You can use that as well to get a basic idea of like how like to just run basic commands. You can use copy.sh. I guess that's the site as far as I remember. Yeah, it is copy.sh, and this you can go for virtual thing. And I would suggest Arch Linux because it's somewhat better. And here it is. And here also, in this you can use basic commands. Like get an idea of how the Linux terminal would be. But Linux is, if we most of the time when we see the word Linux, right, we tend to get an idea of like everything is using the what do you say? Everything is terminal only. There is no graphical user interface. No, it's not like that. See, currently I'm using Linux only, but do you think it's completely terminal? No, right? But why they go for terminal is it's lightweight and its execution speed and everything is very fast when compared to the graphical user way. In graphical user way, you have to search and you have to search the tab, you have to search the option, you have to search the app. Instead of doing all these, what you can do is you can quickly open a terminal and execute the commands. That's much more faster. So that's one of the reasons why we go for terminal based systems. Here also you can practice some Linux commands. I'll share the link in the chat box if you are interested. Control X. So yeah, I have shared the link in the chat box. You can go to that link and see how it is. But there are downside to using this particular thing. That is, there are some commands that you cannot use in this. That is system related tasks like installing a package. All those things you cannot do in this particular system. They have restricted. So that goes. So another advantage is you can restrict what commands one particular user can use. Like you have you can control everything, like who uses what, who can open which folder, everything you can control using Linux. Even some of the servers, right? They use Linux. I can quickly show you an example of how I have configured my own server, but it will work only in my system. It won't work in any other system because I haven't registered with the domain name service. So it will just work in my system alone. I can show you an example of that as well later on in the session. So from the slides, where is the slide? Yeah, so the three ways is either use a virtual box or a VMware or that particular site which I sent. Fourth way is dual boot or using a separate system completely, a single boot complete Linux. So these are the ways you can get started with the Linux operating system. Popular Linux distributions. These are some beginner-friendly Linux distributions that you can explore because high-end will require mostly terminal-based things such as Red Hat Linux and stuff like that because those are business-oriented Linux. So the name itself is right, like Red Hat Enterprise Linux. That's the complete name. So for each purpose, you have a Linux distribution. So you can use any Linux distribution and you can customize it according to your need. Like by default, when I had this terminal in my system, it wasn't in this color or it didn't have all these configurations also. All these things I added. Even you can do it. And the theming option, how you want the apps to be present, everything you can control. Like your entire system, you have the control over it. In Windows, You can customize the things. I'm not saying you cannot, but you'll be using third-party apps. But in Linux, it's not like that. Everything comes in built-in, and if you know how to do, you are in control of your system. So if you break it, you are the person who is in charge of it. So I'll be telling like I said in the introduction, I'll give a brief overview on what each folder does in the Linux operating system. In Windows, we have C drive, where we have the program files. We have the system32 folder, which is the one of the important folder, right? Because if you delete it, you can't open the system and stuff like that. Same way in Linux also we have a directory structure. So everything starts with this forward slash. That means it is a starting point. That is a root location. In Windows, it is the C drive, right? There only most of the time your operating system will be loaded. So that's the starting point, because that's from there only your OS gets loaded into the memory and you can boot it up. So I'll open my terminal in my system as well as the browser thing like we had, right? I'll show you an example of the same thing in both the systems. And I'll execute some basic commands and show you. So I'll go on to the next slide. So I'll show the folder structure itself. So cd means change directory. This is a simple command which you can use even in Windows. So I'll go to the root location, and I'll go to the root location in this as well. cd space forward slash. So you can let me just zoom in, but I don't think it's allowing me to. Yeah, it is not allowing me. Oh, it is awesome. Yeah, I'm the root direction. Even in my system, I'm over there. Now, if I type ls is for Linux users and Mac users. For Windows users, you can use dir command. Even in Linux, you are able to use it. That will list it out, like whatever is present in that particular location. All these things that you're seeing are the folders. And I can list out here also, like ls. See, it is listing out. We have almost a similar folder structure. Like if I compare these two, like in my system in the online virtual platform, we have similar systems because everything, the kernel is going to be the same. It's a Linux based kernel. So the folder structures and everything is gonna be it's gonna have the same folder structure. Almost whatever distribution you choose, directory structure is going to be the same. So I'll give a quick run through on what each folder does. In bin we have the binaries. Binaries in the sense, if in your Windows operating system, if you download a setup file, right? Let's say you have downloaded a setup file for the Chrome browser itself, you'll be having a .exe file. That is an executable file, which is nothing but a binary file. Okay. If you double click on that file, you are able to execute some programs, right? Same way in Linux we have binary files, but here the files do not have any extension. It is just a name. But in Windows we have the .exe extension for the executables. So that's the thing about the binary files. In home we have the user related stuff. Like I am a user, right? If I list out the contents of home folder, it will have the user folder. Like in Windows we have C:, users slash the username, right? In a similar way, in Linux we have something called as home. Home is the starting point of the user details. So in Kamal, I'll be having list of all the things that I'm doing, like ls home slash come. It have all the things that I have, in my system. I think it's a similar way. Like in our Windows system, we have downloads, documents, desktop, everything, right? In similar way, in Linux also we have, but in a different folder. That's the thing. And root is for the main user, because in Linux we have two types of user. One is this, super user or the root user who has complete control over everything in the operating system. Another thing is the pseudo user, who is not exactly an administrator but has the powers, has the ability to take the powers of the super user. That is a pseudo user. Third one is a normal user, which is me, like Kamal is a normal user, so he'll be able to execute some commands, but not everything. If he has to install, he has to become a sudo user and then install it. Like if, let's say I want to install some package uh, in my system. Let's say I want to switch user. For that, I can use sudo command to switch it, and all I have to do is type in the password. I forgot apparently. Oh, I remember the password. So yeah, you can see this layout, right? This was a initial layout which I had in my system, and I changed it to look it like this. So if you know how to do it, you can customize it. Like if you are even stuck anywhere, right? You can just quickly Google it, and there are lots of Stack Overflow pages that will help you out on what you're looking for. Let's say you want to change the color, you can just search it, like how to change color and how to change the theme in Linux, and you'll be having the answers for it. So you should be aware of what you are going to do in the Linux operating system. Then how does Linux differentiate between file types even if they don't have any extension? That is a very good question. In Linux, we have something called file permissions stuff, wherein in Linux, if you see, even a folder is a file. In Linux, everything is a file, if you ask me. So even a directory is a special kind of file which we keeps track of what are the contents inside it. So let's say I'm listing out the files over here. I'll just maximize this. Here, if you can see, we have stuff, right? So we have D. D means directory. R means read permissions. W means write permissions. X means it can be executed as a setup file. Like we have exe file, right? So it will tell you like whether it can be run as a file. That's what it's. Through this only we are able to find out, like instead of having the extension names. But you can also have your media files. Like for example, let me open my file manager, and it's like if you see this, we have this, right? We have .mkv. These are for the video files. Like these are normal things. I'm talking about the system related stuff. So in that, everything is a file. And you can also have custom scripts and aliases. For example, let's say I want to type. Previously I used to type neofetch, right? To shorten that, I can just type nf and it will list it out. All this is you can do it. So, yeah. So Linux is a journal. Like in Linux, we have a journal-based file system. Like if you keep track of who is the owner, what are the file permissions. Just a minute. Just a moment, because I will be back in a minute. Anyways, I hope we don't have any questions so far. Let's quickly go through some of the basic commands in the Linux operating system. Okay, we haven't completed the file itself. Okay, it will be, if you connect a USB drive, it will appear in the media, and you can mount it out. And OPT is optional directory. Like let's say you want to install some other apps such as Google Chrome. Uh, all those stuff you can install it in a separate folder called OPT. And root is for the Linux super user folder. Run is for the runtime variables. All those stuff it will be stored over there. And user var and tmp. all these are temporary locations where you can. In Windows also we have a location where all the temporary files are stored, right? Those stuff are stored over there. And in user we have some commands, like what all commands one particular user can execute. All those are given over there, and it is stored. Everything can be restricted over there. And etc we have the all the configurations. Like for one particular app, let's say you want to configure something, so everything is present inside the etc folder. And Windows, I think the configuration folder is system 32 only. Like in system 32, if you specify something, you can change the configuration, right? You have registry, not the system. You have registry system in Windows. If you change it in the register, it will actually change. You can actually do a lot of stuff if you know how to change stuff in a register. If you do something wrong, then it will obviously the system will crash if you, mess up with the registry thing. If not, if you are familiar with what you're doing, then all the configurations are stored over in the registry, and its equivalent in Linux is the etc folder. So that's a quick rundown about the Linux file structure. Yes, to quickly open a terminal, one of the shortcut is Control Alt T. But let's say you don't have a shortcut available by default, then you can easily add it by going over to the settings and not searching for the keyboard option. Search for keyboard. And if you scroll down, you have something called View and Customize Shortcuts. Scroll down, and if you can see the custom shortcuts. And in my Solar's operating systems, I didn't have a shortcut for terminal, so I have added over here. So through this, you can also have custom shortcuts for any command. Let's say I want to close this tab. So I have added a custom command, which should just, if I click it, it will close it. So that's another way. Next command is pwd. That means present working directory. Like currently we are there in the root directory, right? So if let me just zoom in a little bit then. I hope this is somewhat clear. Yeah, I'm there in the root directory, so it just shows, let me go over to some other directory. Okay, this is some of the shortcuts that I've added. So now if I see give present working directory, I'm inside the home and I'm inside the common users location. In that location, I'm inside this particular folder. So everything it will show, like in which folder you are there using the present working directory. GR is nothing but an alias that I had added. So if I just give alias GR, it will list out like to which it is aliased. This is just a shortcut that you can add. Like usually for executing Python code, you'll be typing Python, right? Python space, you'll be typing the file name. But what I had done is I had added an alias for py. I can just give py space the file name and it will execute it. So confirm that, I can just give, list out all the aliases that I've added. Let me just zoom it out a little bit. So you can add whatever you want. Like let's say you have a custom script. This is one of the scripts that I wrote that I've added to the alias because I wanted to execute from anywhere. That's the reason why we go for aliases, to give a new name or a shorter name for an already existing file or a command so that it can be accessed from any location. And we saw ls, which will list out the directories. Another way is you can just see over here and do it. Okay, I am getting another call. Just a minute. Yep, that's the beauty of open source software. You can see what is happening in your system anytime, and you can also contribute to it. Like if you feel like some features could be added, you can actually contribute to it. Let me just shrink the screen so that I can show you the commands, and I'll list it out. I'll execute one by one the basic commands. And let's skip the clear command for now because I have freshly opened it, so it's no use thinking that. We actually saw the cd command, like we saw the ls command which will list out everything. And let's go to the downloads folder, maybe, or maybe the documents folder. So it will do that. You can also go one step behind using cd space double dot. That command can be used in Windows as well, cd command. And now I'll go to the downloads folder. So in that way, you can go over to any folder, and you can also go to the subfolder inside downloads also. Like, let me go one step back. CD in downloads, we usually have the Telegram desktop folder also. Like even in Windows, inside downloads only we have the Telegram desktop folder. So through this, we can go into the nested folder also to print something on the screen. Let's say in C++ we have cout statement. In C we have a printf statement. In the same way, let's say you want to print something in the terminal. What you can do is you can use the echo statement and type hello world. So to just print it, that's one thing. And sudo is to run some applications as a higher user. Let's say I want to install something called what do we install? Sudo, and like eopkg is a package manager in Solus. In Ubuntu it is apt or apt-get. In Manjaro it is Pacman. So for each the distribution we have a package manager. The name alone will be different, but the package name, right, whatever you're going to install, in most of the cases it will be the same name for all the Linux distributions. So you need not worry if you are not able to get the packages. And let's say even after you search you are not getting, you can easily go to the Google, you can get the source code, and you can just compile it on your own. So that's the beauty of it. Like let's say you don't have a VS Code, for example, let's assume, and you have the source code of VS Code. You can just compile it and you can get the VS Code application. It's that simple. All these things are possible in Linux because you can do that very easily in Linux. In Windows, you need to install the VS like Visual Studio, SDK, Windows SDK, all those stuff you need to install. Like each will be like around 20 GB. But in Linux, it's not like that. Everything is simplified and everything is lightweight. And we saw how ls will list out the files, and yeah, ls will list out the files, and ls-r it will list out all the. It's also listing all the files. ls-a will list out the hidden files. Here we don't have any hidden files, so I'm not having it. So yeah, now let's, if we call the clear command over here, it will clear whatever was there in the terminal. That's the usage of this clear command. And in Linux, there are various ways to create a file. And let me just come out of this folder and let me go create a new folder using mkdir. The command to create a folder in Linux and Windows is the same. You can use mkdir in Linux and Windows to create a folder. And you can go inside for particular folder using the cd command. And one way to create a file is touch space the file name. I'll just give like hello.py. It can be any file. And to check whether the file is created or not, you can check using the ls command. If you want to check it graphically, you can go to home. In home, we created a testing folder, and in testing folder, we created a hello.py folder also. So that is also verified over here. See, you can cross check it in these two ways. But I prefer the terminal way because it's much more faster. Instead of going to some other app and see if it's actually created, this way you can do it. And rmdir is used to create a empty folder. Let's say I'm creating one more folder inside this folder A. If I want, and if I am listing it out, I have folder A, and let's say I want to remove that, I can just use folder A, rmdir folder A, and if I list it out again, you can see that folder is gone. Another way to cross check is over here. Another, I'll just show the mkdir command again. Folder B. See, the folder is created. So you can cross check it in the graphical way as well as the terminal way. So, and yes, you can move files between different folders. Like in here we have hello.py, right? Let's say I want to move this hello.py inside folder B. In the graphical way, what you would do, you would just go into that particular folder. You just cut it out and paste it, right? In terminal way, how you can do this? You can use mv command and mention the file to be moved and the location where you want to move it. So now if I list it out, hello.py is not there. But if I go inside that folder B and if I check it out over here, I'm able to see a folder. And another way to cross check that would be the graphical way. In testing, we have the folder B. Inside that, we have hello.py. So these are some of the comments. And let's say I'll show you how to add an alias also. Like in hello.py, let us write some code. Right, you all guys must be familiar with Python. So just I'll just have some simple printf statements. Checking alias. Checking alias. Print alias is working. Just this, like we'll be executing this Python file using just one name. So what I will do is I will copy the location, like where the file exists, just like inside the folder B, and I will open a file called bash rc, which will be present inside the root directory of that particular user. Yeah, the home location of that particular user. Okay, because it's not a directory, right? It's a file. So in that file, what I will do is to add an alias. All I have to do is alias and alias check, right? So what I will say, check alias. That's the name which I'm giving. And whatever name you are giving, make sure that it is not already present. So check whether if it is already present, what you can do is just type the name. And if it says like command.com, then you're good to go because that name is unique. You cannot have an alias as a name as MV or CD because all those stuffs are already defined. So you can't have an alias for those stuff. But again, you can overwrite it using some extra permissions because it's Linux and you are free to do whatever you like to do. So, but that's not a recommended way to do it. You should not have a alias with an already existing thing. So what I will do is I will execute the Python file since I have already added the analysis. I had given like this alias py equal to Python 3. So I can just give like py space, and we have the file in, where do we have it? The testing folder. Let me just copy it. Slash hello.py. So we have this file. Let's say I want to execute this file without actually running the full Python command and with just using one name. So I'll close the terminal for now because it has to refresh it, right? So now I'll open the terminal again using Control Alt T. Now if I type what was the name again? Check alias, right? Now I'm giving check alias. See, I'm able to execute the code without actually going into that particular folder, without all those all those things. I can just give one name and it will execute the file for me. So that's one way to do it. Another thing Linux is uses the servers, right? I told you I will show an example of a server. So I'll quickly open one of my virtual machine using one of the command which I've already written, like which is vm start. I'll open the content virtual machine. You can also see the content virtual machine in the Oracle virtual box. Like yeah, like I'm actually opening this particular virtual machine. Instead of opening that Oracle app and then giving start, that's too much time if you ask me. So what I did was I just wrote a command to open the virtual machine for me. So it has already opened it. And here if you see, I just have the terminal interface because I don't need the graphical part. I can take access of this particular virtual machine in my system. This white color thing is my system, and this Oracle virtual box is the virtual machine or some other system. Now, let's say I want to log in into that system. So what I would do is I would take SSH, and the student is one of the users in that. So I have already logged in. That's it. It's actually that easy. Once you have configured SSH, you can log in without password also. I have configured in that way only. So before starting this, let me just check if the server is running. Let me go to the new tab and type content.example.com, because this is the server that I had created. Okay, since I had started the virtual machine, it is showing like that. And if I go over to the slash DVD, this is the server which I had created. Like whatever is there inside this virtual machine, right? All these things that you're seeing over here, it's actually inside this machine only. And since I've already taken access of that particular machine, it's over here. And in the content, I can host some of my projects. And since it shows this permission issue, what I would do is I'll just enable that. What do you say? Yeah. Now, if I go content, it won't show the permission issues. You can host your ISO files because as a backup, right? You can store it in a separate system. And if you want to install packages, you can use that system and do it. Usually, what we do is we search for the net. Net also they'll be hosting it somewhere, right? Here, what I have done is I have hosted all the packages that are needed in a separate virtual machine itself. Like in a separate system, I have stored everything. So if I want to install something, I can just use that particular system and install the packages. So this is my own server, which is present in my system, and I'm able to access it in over there. This server is present inside this virtual machine, and I'm accessing it. And I'm also able to access that system using SSH. SSH means secure shell. That's the full form of it. So let's say I go over to that slash where slash and list it out. And let's say I want to create a new file over here. Oh, I haven't gone inside that. I create a new file like sudo nano index.html. I'll just type some basic HTML tag, or even not, it's actually not here. I'll just print like hello world. I'll just print the content if I'm not wrong. So even though I have not given any HTML tags, I believe that it would work. But let's see like to what extent it works. Okay, and now I'm removing that DVD. Yep, it is working. Because it's a .html file and whatever content is there, I'm able to see the content. And this content, you may think that it is inside my system, but no, since I've already taken access of my virtual machine, I'm able to access it using SSH. I can also log in inside this because I created file using my system, right? I have taken access and I have created file using my system, but I can also cross check using the virtual machine also. Let me just log in into the student user. And let me go over to that particular location slash bash. I know the size is somewhat less, so just adjust with me because it's a virtual machine and I don't have any control over the size in that. So here you can see that index.html file had been created. It is this location which I'm accessing in virtual machine and in my actual system are the same. So that's one usage of Linux systems. You can create your own servers and you can host your projects in that. So that's the end of my session. Like if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat box and I'll be taking it up. But if you have some more questions and if you would like to discuss some more things, I'll share another link which has lots of links and you can where is that copy option. Okay, let me just cross check if it's open. Yep. So yeah, if you have any more questions, right, you can go over to the link that I'm posting in the chat box. And I'm posting it. You can join the Discord server wherein you can ask any questions that you want in the usual channel. I have also added a profile link of one of my friends, and I also added an article which you might find interesting because you're in third year, right? So I would like it be better if you, go over to that article and read it over. I know it's 7 pages, but I think it will be useful. Looks like you have a large collection of your birthday pictures. Yes, I do have. I think many of the aliases functions are also, yes, they have, because Microsoft is shifting towards Linux. That's the reason we have Windows subsystem for Linux. But that's just an imitation. It's not the actual thing, right? Actual thing is this Linux only. Like actual thing will have a different feel than what you usually use it. So yeah, just go over to that link and join the Discord server. You can ask the questions whatever you have over there, because I believe the time was still just till 12:15. So thank you for patiently, listening to me. And I'm open to taking up questions, whatever you have. You can put in the chat box and I can take it up.
Yes, Kamal, thank you for the session. It was really interesting only. But the students know, like next hour is CBCS, I think they started moving. Okay, so you can give your contact, maybe mail ID or something, so that they will. I think to Abhiram, you can share it. So we'll have another session so that it may be giving a continuity for this, right? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the next staff is also waiting. Okay, pa.
Okay, ma'am. Bye, ma'am. I hope it
Thank you.
was a good session. Bye, everyone. You
Yeah.
can go over to the link which I've shared in the chat box. I'll share it once again.
Yes.
You
Yes.
can join in the Discord server and you can ask your questions over there. I'll be available there. Bye, everyone.
Great. Thank you.